And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Well, let's recap the NATO summit there in the Netherlands. You just watched live President Trump return to D.C. From his very brief stay there, though really achieving a lot of NATO policy wins while on the ground. Well, Fox's Rebecca Castor with more of those details. Let's listen.
Trump is on his way home from the NATO summit after scoring a major win. All NATO countries have agreed to a massive hike in defense spending, pledging to invest 5% of their GDPs by 2035.
It's a monumental win for the United States because we were carrying much more than our fair share.
This is something Trump had been urging since his first term, and now the alliance is on board, with Russia still looming as a threat to their security.
We have to make sure that we can defend ourselves, and that is why we are doing this.
Trump also met privately with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, their first sit-down since a heated Oval Office argument in February.
Couldn't have been nicer. I'm going to speak to Vladimir Putin and see if we can get it ended.
But overshadowing all of this was the situation in the Middle East. In a leaked U.S. intelligence report calling into question just how successful the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites were. The report claims Iran's program was only set back a few months, while the president insists it's obliterated.
They presented a report that wasn't finished. We're talking about something that took place 3 days ago.
If you want to make an assessment of what happened at Fordo, you better get a big shovel and go really deep, because Iran's nuclear program is obliterated.
Israel's Atomic Energy Commission says their assessment is the U.S. and Israeli strikes set back Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon by many years. In Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
Rebecca, thanks so much. In the meantime, let's talk about the NATO summit achievable items there with none other than Ivana Stradner at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. She joins me. Ivana, so good to see you here. And, you know, I just have to note for the record, and maybe our viewers remember this, but when Donald Trump was a candidate back in 2015 and 2016, he was saying 10 years ago that NATO was ripping the United States off. Does this mean that he's been vindicated, that he was right all along? Because at the time, you'll remember, he was largely derided for saying that NATO needs to pay up. Well, according to this agreement that was reached there in the Netherlands, they finally will be moving from 2% of their GDP to 5% by the year 2035. And you can argue this is a huge achievement for the president, is it not?
I think this is a massive achievement. Indeed, in 2015, let's forget, just 1 year after Russia invaded Ukraine, even then, Europe didn't take security seriously. And for a very long time, they've been free riding also in our efforts. So I think this was a truly massive success for President Trump, because let's also not forget that in 2024, only 22 NATO members actually spent 2% of GDP on defense that was agreed in 2014. So pledging, to spend 5%, it's a truly step in the right direction. Of course, Spain has certain comments about this because they are not willing to spend. But we also have to understand that Spain also has some domestic issues. So there is a lot of populism in those statements. But nevertheless, Trump's effort to rally our allies to spend more is a step in the right direction. The second point that really made me very happy during the NATO summit is that Trump openly emphasized that the United States is willing to support Article 5. Yeah. And for a very long time, Europeans have been very skeptical about this. And it's really past time for them, if I may say, a little bit to chill, because the United States is not going to abandon Europe, but Europe also has to do more efforts to protect itself. One thing that also President Trump correctly noted is what is the definition of Article 5? And I think it's extremely important to talk about these days, because Russia is waging a new generation war that is very different from the way that we understand.
Ivana, could you just briefly remind our viewers, what is Article 5 of the NATO Charter?
Basically, that an attack for a NATO member state means an attack on all countries. And So far, a lot of countries have been very vocal about Article 5. But if you look, for example, how Putin is waging wars, it's a hybrid war, right below the threshold of war. If you read the Russian statements, they're already basically at war with the West. They are waging sabotage activities, cyber attacks. You see how Putin is threatening the Baltic states. We have to take it seriously, and we really have to put Russia on the defensive. So I think it's extremely important that President Trump raise this issue, and I truly hope that in the coming, months, that we are going to have more meetings discussing how to protect ourselves from a hybrid war. And the second point that I also want to make, this is not only about Russia, why we should support NATO. This is also about how Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are working together. They made a coalition of the willing axis of aggressors, however you want to call it. So this is also a serious signal to them.
I just think it's worth noting just kind of the reception that President Trump got at this NATO summit compared to NATO summits of the past. I mean, you remember, a lot of people remember, many European leaders at the time, especially in his first term, looked at Trump with great trepidation, looked at him askance. They weren't sure, due to some of his statements, that he would commit to Article 5 for the United States here. I just think this post encapsulates this moment here, that he really was kind of the man of the hour at this summit. Jackie Heinrich noted this exchange that had kind of gone viral today on social media, that a Sky News reporter asked NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte if, quote unquote, gushing praise and text President Trump and referring to him earlier as daddy makes him look weak. And Rutte strongly defended it, saying that if Trump were not reelected, NATO countries would be making weak pledges about their collective security. And I just want to highlight this. We don't have the clip itself, but Trump's press conference wrapped with a question about a comment by Mark Rutte, he's the NATO Secretary General, who suggested today that Trump was, quote unquote, daddy to the alliance. Asked if he considers NATO allies his children, Trump chuckled but did not offer a direct answer. Trump said of Rutte, quote, no, he likes me. I think he likes me. Is that an apt kind of description or metaphor that the United States is daddy, the other 31 NATO members are the United States' children? Should we be characterizing that way? Is that somewhat too simplistic, or no? Is that the actual reality of the alliance?
President Trump openly stated that he wants to make America great again and peace through strength. And let's call a spade a spade. There is no security in the West without U.S. leadership. And we are not supporting NATO just because of some ethical issues or because we believe that it's only the right thing to do. It also really, truly protects our national security. So I think that the NATO Secretary General absolutely understands the importance of the United States and our leadership there. Of course, media likes to report different things, mocking President Trump, saying, how this was disrespectful and making him weak. Actually, I think exactly the opposite. And after all, these are all just headlines where we really have to look at several things. Number one, 5%. Number two, NATO Article 5 commitment. Number three, I think also Trump's statements where he's finally realizing that Putin is not who he is, and he is raising certain concerns, is also a step in the right direction.
Let's talk about the war in Ukraine briefly, because the president did have a one-on-one on the sidelines of the summit with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. I want to put this up here. Zelenskyy saying this: I had a good meeting with POTUS in The Hague, saying, I congratulated President Trump on the successful operation in the Middle East. It is important that the U.S. actions have weakened not only their nuclear program, but also their drone production capabilities. We will continue to keep an eye on the situation. Zelenskyy says, we discussed the protection of our people with the president. First and foremost, the purchase of American air defense systems to shield our cities, our people, churches, and infrastructure. Ukraine is ready to buy this equipment and support American weapons manufacturers. Europe can help. We also discussed the potential for co-production of drones. We can strengthen each other. He says, I also informed the president about how the technical team's meetings in Istanbul went, as well as the exchanges of prisoners and the fallen. Russia handed over the bodies of its own troops Forensic examinations are currently being carried out in Kyiv to identify their relatives. He also says, we talked about the situation on the battlefield. Putin is definitely not winning. I presented the president with the facts about what is really happening on the ground. So they did not meet with each other at the G7 last week at the summit there in Alberta in Canada, though they did meet, of course, that very famous, iconic photo in St. Peter's Basilica on the sidelines of Pope Francis's funeral. And now they're meeting here today at the NATO Summit in the Netherlands. What stuck out to you in that statement I just read from Zelenskyy about what they discussed?
I do believe that they discussed a lot of things related to the battlefield situation, the support. But I also think that number one thing that Trump is realizing these days is that how Ukraine can be beneficial to the United States in terms of their knowledge. We can learn a lot how Ukraine is protecting itself on the battlefield. Also, the production of drones. The future of warfare will be in that area. So there is a lot of things that we can learn and we can cooperate with Ukraine. And finally, my point is that President Trump truly wants to end this war. And the only issue is that Putin doesn't want to end this war. He wants to end it on his own term, which means to completely subjugate Ukraine. And I also don't think that Putin is willing to negotiate. So I think Trump is also considering into giving Ukraine more Patriot missiles, which is exactly a step in the right direction because he displays actually frustration with Putin. President Trump said that Putin is misguided, and I believe that he's slowly realizing how Moscow is actually our enemy. So Putin is trying to make this war a protracted war and to make sure that we are exhausted, that we do not support Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, I was very pleased to see that President Trump also emphasized that he is not willing to take on Putin's effort and offer to mediate in the Middle East. He said that first and foremost, he needs to mediate his own conflict. So I think he's really slowly realizing Putin's game.
Yeah, there had been some talk. Remember, on the campaign trail, President Trump had indicated that on day one, he's going to end this war when he takes office again, that it would take 24 hours to end this war. A reporter asked him about that and whether he was kind of naive to that notion. He admitted he was being sarcastic about saying that. And so do you think this has been tougher than President Trump anticipated, getting Putin to the table?
So Putin is a KGB guy. He thinks differently from us. He understands very well how to play his opponents and how to play to their weaknesses. One of the most powerful weapons that Putin has had so far is his threats regarding nuclear weapons and making sure that we do not support Ukraine out of fear of escalation. In the US, we like to always talk about cooperation and win-win. In Russia, leaders believe in a zero-sum game. Either I win or you lose. And that's precisely how Putin views this war. He doesn't need to roll on tanks and jets in Washington, D.C. All he truly has to do is to exhaust the West, to make sure to destroy our alliance within, and which is our center of gravity, and to achieve his objectives. And finally, I also heard multiple times, from Washington that Putin is willing actually to take this war somewhere else, and I absolutely agree. Pay attention to the Baltic states. Putin is willing now to challenge Article 5 and to make sure we do not respond.
All right, Ivana Stradner, we're going to have to leave it at that. It's always good to see you. We'll talk soon.